Now, on the second and final day of the G7 summit in southern Italy, migration was one of the focal points of discussion among world leaders. The G7 host Italy and its right-wing premier, Giorgia Meloni, is seeking to increase investment and funding for African nations as a means of reducing migratory pressure on Europe. Speaking at a press conference on the sidelines of the G7 summit, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said that illegal migration is now a global emergency. Conservative Party leader stated that it was for the first time a G7 summit had discussed migration.
Illegal migration is now a global emergency. More people are moving across borders than at any time in our history. We cannot stand by and watch this human tragedy unfold. The G7 has focused on dealing with the root causes of migration, including a new package of UK development assistance for Africa and Italy's new Apulia Food Systems initiative to tackle food insecurity.
The G7 leaders agreed to establish a coalition to combat human smuggling, increasing collaboration in investigating trafficking networks, and confiscating their assets from African countries.
Together with Georgia, as you know, have been talking a lot about this issue. Leading on this issue is important to me and to her that the G7 discuss this, and the discussion today was incredibly productive, and we have reached an agreement on collective action to tackle illegal migration, particularly to target the criminal gangs, to recognise the criminality that they are, that is only growing, and make sure that we cooperate and work together to share intelligence and other things to take action across the supply chain. So that was the conversation we had today. Obviously these things don't happen overnight, but I said when I got this job and made my first speech on illegal migration that where the UK led, others will follow. 18 months since then has shown that to be true.
The G7 is an informal forum with an annual summit to discuss economic policy and security issues. The members are Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom and the US. Edward P. Joseph is a senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies and a foreign policy analyst. He's now joining us live to talk about this issue. Mr. Joseph, good to see you and welcome. Migration featured greatly in the just concluded G7 summit. I will ask you this. Is illegal migration a global problem? Do you agree with the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak when he says this?
Well, Eric, first, it's very good to be with you and your viewers from here in Odessa, Ukraine, which indirectly plays a role here in creating the conditions, ideally, for people to be able to remain in their homes by removing food insecurity. Of course, food insecurity created by Vladimir Putin's aggression on Ukraine and attempt to block here, food exports, these massive food exports that the world needs. And absolutely, the answer to your question is yes. The question of insecurity-related migration threatens a good part of the globe, not everywhere on the globe, but of course a good part of the globe. And that's why it is a top priority, of course, for the G7, which has come up with this new G7 coalition on migration and these new initiatives, which, in their words, focus on the root causes. That is, rather than just trying to stop the smugglers and stop the attempts to make it, for example, to Europe here, rather than do that, is to address and try to improve conditions, particularly, for example, in Africa, so that people can live lives, secure, prosperous lives at home, and don't need to take the massive risk to try to get to Europe and a new life. Please.
Mr. Joseph, who or which countries are stoking this problem, making it worse than it already is, having in mind that it happens in every continent around the world?
Well, there are actually, yes, it's true, there are some states that try to exploit this problem, and one of them is, of course, a proxy of Russia.
Mr. Joseph, finally, since we're talking about solutions, how can migration be stemmed once and for all? What's that one thing that countries around the world which have been affected by migration can do to stop this issue?
Well, Eric, it goes to trying to finally achieve stable and balanced development around the globe, where you don't have massive imbalances between the conditions in some countries of the world and in others. Now, achieving that, of course, is a great challenge, enormous difficulty, the challenge of our time. And we know, of course, what some of the solutions are. And a lot of it has to do, of course, with basic conditions of rule of law, of institutions. Tunisia is a great example here. This was the shining light of the so-called Arab Spring of 2011, the one where democracy appeared to take root. Where is it now? It's moved back into the autocratic direction that led to the first revolution of the Arab Spring in 2011. And economic conditions are not improving in Tunisia. So we know the correlation there between strong institutions, rule of law, democracy, but achieving that and achieving equalized investment in education, in human capital, in social services. These are all the well-known building blocks for development, for equal development. Of course, they're difficult to achieve, but at least the G7 is focusing on these questions of root causes and development, and not just stopping migrants from coming to the shores of Europe. Please.
I've been talking to Mr. Joseph, who is a senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies and a foreign policy analyst. He's been talking to us live from Odessa, Ukraine. Mr. Joseph, thank you and keep safe.
Thank you very much, Eric.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.